Alright, let's go ahead and get started on 4 movies, one of which is the theatrical release of a very anticipated sequel, and the other 3 are streaming movies. So there was going to be a 4th streaming movie with Echo Valley, but I kind of ran out of time, and I'm not entirely enthused to eventually get to that, but I will. It'll probably be on the next one with like F1 and Megan and stuff like that, so that'll be where that is. But in the meantime, I want to get straight into 28 Years Later, which I didn't know where my expectations were, because 28 Days Later is one of my favorite horror movies, if not one of my favorite movies, period. And I'm in that crowd where I do really like 28 Weeks Later, even if it's not on that same level, like great in its own way, and still kind of captures the similar feel that Boyle had and Alex Garland had. So going into this, even though Boyle and Garland are back, and there was a lot of anticipation around that, with the whole long-delayed sequel thing, I wasn't one of those people saying, like, don't do it, but I also wasn't, like, super insanely hyped or anything. I feel like now I just kind of wait to see what happens, rather than feeling one way or the other to sort of manage expectations. I do know everybody went crazy for that trailer, and being somebody that doesn't watch trailers or any of the marketing, that alone got me really curious how the trailer itself kind of became this phenomenon when it came out. And I went back and watched it after I saw the movie, and I get it now. And with that also, the Boots thing with the music being in the movie itself too, kind of gives you doubly that experience. But I'll just say right away that this is a movie that I did see it last week. I've been sitting on it for a week. And I really like this that we're doing now, where back in the day on this channel, I literally see the movies and then immediately start talking about, like 10 minutes out from the movie, we would start talking about it. For movies like this, especially like 28 Years Later, I'm really happy about this whole kind of sitting on it for a week thing before we talk about it, because in this case especially, I feel like it would have probably been a different conversation. Because I knew while I was watching this movie that it was fucking beautiful, and I was really loving it. And like every now and then there was something that kind of came in where it's like, oh, that's kind of tonally weird, or then, without saying anything, the very last scene, it kind of might leave you with a certain impression in a certain way as you walk out of the movie. But now that I've come out of it, this whole week, I've just been thinking about it. So the whole movie, it's been very hard to not think about this movie for the last week, and in all the good ways. Like, just the more I think about it, the more it's growing, and the more I'm falling in love with it. And overall, it's a really satisfying experience, which is interesting coming from a movie that's essentially just setting up another movie. And it's that kind of franchise move where you might think, oh, a movie just feels like filler or just like an advertisement, and like it barely feels like we get whole stories anymore. But this does by itself, even though it is setting up something else very clearly, does very much feel like its own experience, not just its own standalone experience, but just as a unique experience in general. I really love it for that. And as far as being, a Boyle movie with Boyle's very specific vision and style, with like when we get the Boots montage towards the beginning, and we get that very familiar frenetic Boyle editing that we get in so many of his movies, and even the tone jumps. Like, a lot of people are surprised by the tone jumps in this, but that's also kind of always been Boyle's style. It's kind of tonally all over the place, but in a way that feels like controlled chaos, which is what makes him so appealing, and one of the more, at least in my opinion, like, legendary living directors that's like currently working right now. I recently like marathoned his movies like 2 or 3 years ago, and that was an I always knew I was a Danny Boyle fan, but in the last few years I've like really started to notice just how big of a fan I am, and this is only very much going into that. So of course, it's going to have these thrilling sequences and these thrilling horror sequences, there's chase scenes, and there's, these terrifying moments, and you never know, like, there's so many different kinds of infected now because it's been so long. You never quite know which one or ones you're going to run into. You could run into ones that can barely move or ones that can sprint after you, and they've just, the way they've branched off makes it this really unpredictable experience. And yeah, as far as like the tone shifts, that also kind of makes it unpredictable in a way that in retrospect I'm liking a lot more. Where it is, I've seen so many people say that it's like a coming of age movie technically with this character Spike, who is the son of Aaron Taylor Johnson and Jodie Comer, and how we have like a whole journey through his eyes, and he kind of comes of age in this environment that we now know. And I do get that, but I like also how there's like, as he goes on a journey, there's like a different tone every time his backdrop changes. Whether it be, you know, a coming of age movie or a horror movie or this emotional family movie, and like a fractured family, whether it be emotionally or by the fact that Jodie Comer is sick in this way that nobody's quite sure of for a long time of what's going on with her, but she's very sort of unpredictable and like hallucinatory and like not always lucid. And you never quite know where she's going to be at which time, especially when this is a case and this is a scenario where it really matters to be lucid and know what's going on at any given moment. And so, and that heightens up, like, not just the emotion, but also a scary factor and a suspenseful factor of not knowing exactly what's about to happen and when. And the way that the tones kind of do that for the audience also, where it's like you don't know if the next scene is going to be comedic or scary or sad or mysterious or just artful, whatever it may be. And just this whole thing. There's a character that comes along, Eric, who is when it kind of takes this sort of unexpected, sudden comedic tone for a little while. And yeah, like in the moment that might seem jarring, but now that I'm looking at it as like a whole experience, I'm appreciating all of these aspects of it. And I love the fact that it can be so off the wall like this. And I was talking about Boyle's style and how much you can see it. And it's like, with this being a franchise movie that's going to continue on as a franchise movie, looking at it from just the first movie with Days, and that being the other Boyle movie here, how you can see that it's like the same vision, and you get the same vibes, but in this really refreshing way, it also feels so incredibly different from Days, and this sort of, how it sort of embraces this weirdness, for lack of a better term, like this almost surreal quality in certain ways, especially when we get to the Bone Temple with Ralph Fiennes, which is an incredible set, and he a perfect casting choice, as he always is. And we kind of get to this contemplative place that's kind of been coming in and out, but here I could understand if somebody were to say the movie kind of grinds to a halt at the Bone Temple, but what I really love about it is this is a moment where it feels contemplative between the craziness that came before it and then the craziness that's going to come kind of right here at the end. But it's like, even in these moments of contemplation that the movie's having at the Bone Temple, there's still, and not just, you know, there's the setting itself, obviously, but also what's going on and how quickly it seems like this is becoming normal for Spike especially. There's like a simmering insanity still going on even when the movie has calmed down. And it's still like everything you're looking at is still unthinkably insane, but because it has like this sort of calmer tone, it sort of lures you in this way that's kind of the point of what's going on and what Fiennes is doing and all that. And that's a really interesting way to juggle the tones and sort of make Spike as a character and then us, the audience, like kind of just accepting of whatever thing is coming next, even if we don't know what it is, or if it's going to be totally different than what everything else we've just seen. I don't know, but it's really exciting as it goes on. And like I said, just I was thinking as I was watching it, I was like, I thought this movie is like a work of art. And I've loved that now that I've been looking it up over the week and seeing that sentiment from various others as well. I love that we're kind of on the same page as that, because I know a lot of people also aren't taking to this. I think there's a lot of people that aren't getting what I think they may have expected out of it, and I'm hoping it's one of those things, whether it be having the context of the upcoming movies or just sort of sitting on it like I have, but sitting on it for a longer period of time. If it's something the people who aren't into it right now might come around on and just kind of take it as, when I first saw it, it wasn't what I expected, so they kind of lash out a little bit, maybe, and it just feels completely like a blind side of what you thought it would be versus what it actually is, and I'm hoping they can come around also. And so, yeah, talking about that last scene also, where Jack O'Connell comes into the mix. And I like that it's something that is not out of nowhere, because it's been built up the whole movie, from the prologue to like a couple of moments here and there on the journey. So we've been building up this mysterious thing that's going on parallel. We just haven't really seen it up close and personal until like the very last few seconds of the movie. And that's a good way to set up a second movie. I do also get how, while it's not out of nowhere story-wise, yeah, it's pretty out of nowhere stylistically when this happens at the very end. And now I can get, but like I said, when we see it as a full picture, I'm curious. And like I said, as it went on, and the more I've thought about it, and the more I think back to his other movies, the more I tend to embrace Boyle kind of jumping around in tones here and just kind of doing what feels right but also feels crazy, and kind of just, swinging for the fences and giving this really surreal experience. I'm just completely and totally on board with this. So that's I'm actually quite surprised. Even as much as I love Days, and as much as I should have known with Boyle and Garland coming back that it was possible it could have been this good, I was not prepared to love it as much as I do. So that makes me very happy. So let's go to Predator, Killer of Killers. Something else that is not what I was expecting, personally. Again, I didn't really look much into this. I think I barely knew this one was coming, because I did know about Badlands coming in, like, November. The live-action one that Trachtenberg's also doing. And Trachtenberg coming over from Prey. And my brother and I, if you're interested, have a whole video on this channel where we talk about all the Predator movies up to this point, from the original movie to Prey. And we go into each movie and how we feel about it. And so, continuing on from that and going on to this, here's what I say when I say I wasn't expecting what this was. I did know it was an animated movie, which I was sort of wary of, because if you're, familiar with the channel, you know that I have a disconnect from like an emotional disconnect from animation. Like, I really, unless it's like, the classics that I've always known, like in the last 15 years or so, I've been struggling to connect with animation anymore. And it's not, a put down on the medium at all. It's just, for some reason, that's the way I react emotionally, is that I don't react emotionally. So I wasn't sure how I was going to take to this, and it did take me a while to get used to the animation style, where it moves kind of slowly and almost feels like sort of clunky in a way, but then I get that that's apparently a style of animation I'm just not totally familiar with. So as I was getting used to that and going into the movie itself, it starts, and of course a title card comes up that says The Shield, and so I assume that this is a chapter title. Like, this is a chapter in this particular story that we're set in at this particular time. And we still see, even though we're going way back in time, centuries and centuries, I still love that we're keeping up the trend of the Predators just sort of stumbling into other stories that are already going on and seeing that happen. And then we get this new sort of design and style of Predator. It's like this hulking monster. And the stuff they set up in Predator 2 when they go on the ship and we see all the different stuff that alludes to all these other generations where this has happened, with various different kinds and styles of Predators that have like their own different like weapons and everything like that goes all the way back. And so it makes sense where we go, but like I said, I had no idea what the concept was, so I was like, okay, we're in this era, and this is whatever this story is. And then, when this segment ended, and we started the second one, I thought, well, this feels much farther into the future than this one does. Still in, like, the 1600s, I think it is, but very far, like 1,000 years later from where we were. And then that's when it occurred to me that it was an anthology movie. And that wasn't a chapter title, that was a segment title as we went. And then that's when I started to get really interested and really hyped, because pretty much no matter what it is, I really, really fucking love an anthology movie, and this is a really good thing to use the anthology format for. Because I'm not big on everything being a series. Like, everybody wants world building, everything wants everything to be a series, everybody wants everything to be milked and milked and milked. And I'm just not that guy. Like, if it's a good story, and it has a beginning and end, then I'm good. I kind of move on. But if you were going to do this and say, like, let's explore what we saw in Predator 2 and those other possibilities, an anthology movie is absolutely the choice I personally would make. And it kind of it keeps you from sort of running out of... Because anything that does seem like it could be series-worthy may eventually get to that point where it's just kind of getting squeezed for everything it's worth. And with an anthology movie, I do feel like you have more of a sort of boundary before you overstep too much, and then it's... And then you get to the point to where, yeah, some stuff may really work, and then there's other stuff that may not also. And it's not going to always be of this quality, even if you keep going farther and farther as far as you can. So I like the idea of sort of jumping through the centuries in this anthology movie format. And I think it was the second movie, the second segment, that is the one I liked the most. And the way how it's like this mostly unspoken story. Like, there's hardly any dialogue in it. And the setting up of these brothers and the brotherly bond that they have, even when they're destined to, like, always be dueling, and this being what the Predator stumbles into and the way they have to come together, and the way that wraps up is this really great and thrilling, and it's what they build up to with all these segments. That this one really highlights, but it's in all three before we get to our final one. Setting up where our characters are emotionally and kind of giving them either backstories or relationships that are their own thing entirely, that could make their own segments by themselves before the Predators even stumble across them. And then adding those stakes and then bringing this into it and having to completely... The characters have to completely reshape what they're doing in this story, and with characters like this, how they see each other, and how they sort of connect within battle is something really interesting, and I like how much of the movie really explored that through all of them. If there's one thing that kind of let me down with this second story was when I was talking about how there's practically no dialogue. There is eventually dialogue, and I don't really think it was necessary. Like, kind of right at the end there. It was very much like the, that last T'Challa Killmonger moment. And it's like, I feel like you could have done that wordlessly. Like, I don't think you really needed to add much of anything to what had already happened for that to be there without words. And it was doing a really good job of that. So I don't really think that last bit of dialogue was necessary, but everything, works so much, I'm not going to get hung up on that or anything. This third story is also interesting when we jump to World War II, and this is when we get aerial action and aerial sequences, so the ships are getting a lot more screen time. And what's really interesting about this, and we kind of talked about it in that previous video where we talked about the franchise, was the ships don't get a lot of screen time, and weirdly enough, I think the movie that gave the ships the most screen time was The Predator, the most hated movie. And I think we even talked in that video about how we want to kind of see the Predators on the ground and the battle, like this sort of these personal battles going on. And because I know a lot of people like, one of the things about the original movie was people say if they could cut one thing, it would be the opening shot that shows us where the Predator is coming from. So to take that sort of controversial topic in the franchise and sort of put it in this place where it can really belong in like this dogfighting way was a really great and interesting take also. And setting up this character also, his relationship on the ground and in the air with the Michael Biehn character. So everything is really working here in this great way. And we get to the last segment, which I was not expecting. And I don't think I want to say too much about what that last segment is, but I like how it sort of all comes together in a way despite the fact we've been jumping centuries and centuries. And it's sort of this grand finale piece that goes on. There's a lot that I like about this last sequence, how it's mostly action, and all of our stakes, our emotional stakes have been established. Everything that we've set up, like the really, you know, big bad predator, with like the spine sort of like robe or whatever you want to call it, and this sort of royalty to him. And I will say the one thing that kind of kept bringing this last sequence down was the character of Torres, who we just met, and him kind of being during this battle like it's this very serious battle with high emotional stakes and, like I said, really sort of tricked out predators. So to see Torres in this battle, basically, like, do you remember 90s cartoons where there was always the kid with the backwards hat and the skateboard that did running commentary and kind of fumbled and bumbled around and then was eventually useful? For some reason, it feels like the character of Torres in the fourth segment is barely the Torres we knew in the third segment. It was really weird. But that's what he kind of becomes. That kind of seemed really out of place. But for the most part, all the segments do work, and I like the way they come together. And seeing the different designs of Predators and their different weapons and all that. And like I said, this anthology format's a really good way to capitalize on that setup in Predator 2, where we have all these generations of them and stuff like that. So, yeah, this was a really nice surprise also. I shouldn't be too surprised because I did know long before I saw it how critics had reacted to it. I think critics and most audiences, I think, really took to it also. Yes, it was like seriously acclaimed. And I can get that now as well. So I'm also really happy with that. So let's go on to, let's go from Hulu to Amazon with Deep Cover, a comedy starring Bryce Dallas Howard, Orlando Bloom, and Nick Mohammed as improv comics. A couple of them are kind of just coming onto the scene for various different reasons in their stories, and they all kind of converge here before they're brought in to do these Hitman-style sting operations for Sean Bean. By Hitman, I of course mean the Linklater movie with Glenn Powell from last year, one of my favorite movies from last year, where it's like that comedic tone of these unsuspecting people coming in to do these sting operations for the cops. Mind you, I say that's like the setup and that's what it reminds me of, but I'm not saying that this is like Hitman in really any way. This one is sort of much more of an action comedy type in a big way, and in its own way that I really love. And it's also where Hitman was like several different operations. This one is like one continuous operation that goes on through the whole movie. So just right away, the first thing you need to compliment is that cast. With Bryce Dallas Howard, who I love so much. She's like got this, when Argyle came out, everybody was bashing Argyle, and I didn't like Argyle either. But one of the things I really did love about, one of the only things I loved about Argyle was seeing her in like a leading role, and how like Matthew Vaughn knew like, yes, we should be putting Bryce Dallas Howard in leading roles. She's got this very sort of confident leader presence. Even when she's playing characters that aren't confident, there's still like this confidence that comes through. That makes her like this really reliable lead actress, and it's really hard to believe how much she's shown her talent in the past and how underutilized she's kind of been throughout her career. And I like that we're kind of seeing a point now where she's kind of going her own way, where she's doing movies like this or like Argyle, but she's also like, directing her. So she's directing like Star Wars stuff, I think, and she directed like her own documentary and stuff like that. And I really love just seeing Bryce Dallas Howard just doing her thing. And that's, and just, and no matter what she does, it's going to be appealing. And seeing her, like I said, bringing that sort of confidence and sort of leadership to this particular role that really specifically calls for that, is really great to see. And then seeing Orlando Bloom, who sort of, yeah, he's done like his most well known parts like Legolas and Will Turner have like these a lot of comedic bits as they go, but to kind of see Orlando Bloom do like a fully comedic performance, and he's done like maybe a romantic comedy here and there or something like that, but here where it just really calls for him to like embarrass himself and play this very sort of shameless character, where he's like the method actor of the group, and of course the whole point is he's like clowning method actors and what they do. The performance is clowning actors, clowning method actors, and how like his claim to fame is being like the pizza knight in commercials, but he takes himself like way too seriously, and the way he finds himself in situations where he basically has no choice but to continue to commit to that until he's practically lost in it. It's a very sort of Kirk Lazarus thing, but in its kind of own way. And his commitment to that, the more committed he is, the funnier it gets. And that's really satisfying to see. And, of course, somebody I love, Nick Mohammed. I actually haven't watched all of Ted Lasso yet. I'm mainly going on Taskmaster, but regardless, I know who he is. And there is a moment in this movie where he is compared to Paddington, and that makes perfect sense and perfectly sets up who this character is. And how and the way he comes into the story, where he's basically taking an improv comedy class just to basically learn how to speak to people in normal conversation. It's like that's where his confidence is, and of course he's going to be the one that's kind of thrust into the most outlandish of the situations, and which is going to be comedy gold. Of course, it's a perfect setup. It's perfectly cast, and it does everything it needs to do to work. And then we've also got a really nice supporting cast here with, like, I mentioned Sean Bean, but we've also got Paddy Considine and Ian McShane, as they kind of go into this underworld. And I love the fact that they cast actors who, like, we've seen do comedic parts, and are very capable of it. A very underrated comedic performance, in my eyes, is Ian McShane and Brett Ratner's Hercules. Just has me howling with laughter. And so to see him playing like this sort of big bad character amidst this comedy, but he kind of already has comedic sort of sensibilities despite all the otherwise serious parts that he plays. And the same for Paddy Considine also, especially since his character is kind of in a gray area in this. So he can go from like bad guy to comedic scenes, like back and forth throughout it at the drop of a hat. And somebody like him is definitely capable of that. Of course, we've seen him in stuff like Hot Fuzz and The Death of Stalin, and his opening scenes in The Death of Stalin there especially are really great. And obviously he's literally doing Mobland right now, so he's like on the other side of this also. And so he's really believable and all of that also. So that's just, like, the cast itself is already, once you establish that, you realize how much a movie like this is going to work. And the fact that it just kind of sticks to what it is and doesn't try to be much of anything else, it really makes it feel smarter than probably a lot of other movies that might, be comparable to this as far as, like, action, much more action-y comedies go. One cast member that was sadly wasted is another Taskmaster contestant with Sophie Duker, one of my absolute favorite Taskmaster contestants. And here, she's just part of the worried friend group that Bryce Dallas Howard has, where it's like, oh, she's doing this thing, but they're like, oh, you're not married, and oh, are you okay? Like, are you on drugs? We don't see you anymore. And she's just in that. She just has to make worried faces, and it's like she's capable of some wonderfully insane shit. And there's literally a character later that's like a dealer. They have like this sort of confrontation with, and things get really, really out of hand and spiral out of control. And it's like she absolutely should have been that dealer. That would have been much more fun than giving her just the concerned friend number 3 part. That's such an insane casting to me, why they would just waste her like that. But yeah, so we're thrust into it, and we meet all the characters, and then we have like our first big comedic bit. And this is one of those movies that really caught me off guard, because we're off to the races already. We're half an hour in, and when we're off to the races half an hour in, and we've already had one of like our big comedy set pieces, that's when the title comes up. That surprised me, that this is one of those movies where the title comes up like a third of the way through. And then, yeah, so it goes on from there, and you can probably imagine, like, you know, the kind of comedic situations we get into. But, yeah, like I said, the cast makes it work so much, and the setup and the characters make it work so much. Just the whole time. Like, it never really feels like it runs out of gas. There's actually this really great moment when we reach a turning point in the middle, and it's at this place where it's like, oh, that's okay, that's an interesting turn, but I guess you could also maybe see that coming. And then it's like, but now also that we've set it up, maybe one too many things is going on here. Like, I think we're starting to fill up on our plot lines here a little bit. And then just as you start to think that, they just cut that plot line off. They just stop it in its tracks. And that's where it's like, okay, so not only is this very funny, it's very smart writing, too. And that's something that you always love to see in a comedy. Because it can feel few and far between when you get writing that feels this smart in a pretty, you know, broad comedy. So that's really great. And you get stuff like escalation. Like, there's a moment where Nick Mohammed tries to do the thing where you break a bottle and defend yourself, and he can't break the bottle, and then this only escalates further as he goes on. And I love stuff like that. There's another character here, one of the cop characters, who's like kind of inept in a way, but he's also seen like all the cop movies and shows, so he's got like, he likes to try out the cop cliches he's seen before. There's a funny moment when he's introduced where he debates whether he's going to go over or under the police tape. That's just a really funny character to throw in there, just to throw into the mess that's already happening, without it being too much. And yeah, and it goes to these satisfying places where it never runs out of gas, which comedies, especially action comedies, can tend to do. So another one that I just felt really happy and satisfied with as it ended. So let's go over from Amazon to HBO Max now to Mountainhead, which is a movie written and directed by the creator of Succession, Jesse Armstrong, I think his name is. I actually haven't watched Succession. I might at some point, but I only have a very vague sense of the style of it and the dialogue and stuff like that. I'm going to assume it's probably pretty similar to this. What I really love here is, I know one thing Succession is obviously known for is its ensemble. It's a pretty incredible ensemble. And I like the fact that this, while there's other characters sort of around what's going on, there's mostly 4 main characters, and they're the only 4 that we're with, and we're in this isolated location. So it almost kind of feels like a play we're watching, but also not like, I know that can seem like a bad thing. I don't mean in the bad sense. But as far as just like being in the characters and then how they sort of evolve or don't evolve as these things happen in this one location, and they sort of have to react to what's going on, and then whether or not they sort of start to turn on each other, because we are dealing with people who are incredibly obsessed with themselves and obsessed with their wealth. Like, this whole thing, them being up here in Jason Schwartzman's big-ass house on this mountain, is set up to be, like, just a hangout. Like, you know, they're just gonna have really nice food and, like, coffee and tea and, like, do some games or something, and that's gonna be what it is. And then none of that happens, of course, because they're too obsessed with their wealth, and they just go right into what else can we do to become richer and more successful, and not just change the world, but like alter the world in very significant ways, basically through the touch of the buttons on their phone. And that's so naturally you have characters who are very sort of power hungry and feel like gods in their own mind, and they're all in this one space together. And that sets off where we go. And obviously this very satirical look at, you know, this sort of tech bro thing that's been happening. You could say, like, all four of them are, like, you know, their own sort of Musk type specifically, or maybe, like, the Corey Michael Smith character, maybe, more specifically. But it does feel more of just, like, a general sense. Like, it's not necessarily targeting anybody in particular, because I know some people can get sort of up in arms if something's a bit too on the nose. But there's also the thing where it's like, sometimes you just really want to see something get a really good satirical skewering. And I think that's where the comedy of this comes in. Now, I do know, I think the audience score on this movie is like a 26% or something. And I'm really not surprised by that. I looked at the comments just to see, and it seems to be people saying, like, wasn't this supposed to be a comedy? Why is this not funny? Like, what even is this? It's not a comedy. It is a comedy, and it is quite funny, but it's in a very sort of specific way, to the point that I think a lot of the laughs that come, at least they did for me, are exasperated laughs, but they are there. And it's by, like, the more absurd these people get with their viewpoints and how they view the world through their very sort of wealthy and successful eyes that are altering it as we speak, and see everything in a completely different way than the rest of the people and the rest of the world. And how, like, they're basically in their own sort of bubble at the very top of the world up here throughout it. And the way they react to certain things. Like I said, when you really zone in on his particular viewpoint, that's when the laughs sort of start to come in, especially when we get to that third act that goes in a pretty unexpected direction, and the absurdity really starts to ramp up as it goes. But we get stuff here like I was talking about the Corey Michael Smith character. I really love this Corey Michael Smith rise we've been on. Like, he was there's not a lot of things I liked about the Gotham TV show, but him as the Riddler is something that was the first place I saw him, that's why I bring that up. And from then on, it's like, oh, like, what else? I wonder what else this guy could be capable of. He's probably just going to be the Riddler from Gotham. But no, there's playing Chevy Chase on Saturday Night. He's in several Todd Haynes movies. He was just in May, December. And here, I love sort of seeing the rise of him. He also just got cast in something else big that I can't remember off the top of my head, but there was, like, it was just a headline. And so, seeing the rise of him on top of these three actors who are already quite successful in their own rights, obviously Steve Carell, and then also Jason Schwartzman and Rami Youssef. And so, and seeing their sort of different personalities and what they're bringing to it, and Carell especially just being, like, the most soulless. And it's like the fact that we learn in his very first scene that he's dying of cancer. And so you think that would just, no matter what, that's going to make a character sympathetic to a degree. But even the way he reacts to his cancer shows you the kind of guy that he is, and the emotionless black hole that he is. And the way he's able to play that. Carell playing, like, the dark characters. And, like, in this case in particular especially, it's like, people probably saw Steve Carell and thought, like, wow, I thought this movie would be a lot funnier. His character, the more sort of soulless he is, the funnier the character does become. Like, you can get the sense that, like, there's something behind Carell's eyes and expression that lets you know that he's in on why we would find this character funny in his sort of cruelty. And that's something that's really... Carell is such a layered actor in so many ways. We obviously learned that in Foxcatcher, but even as it's gone on, and as he kind of sort of chose that comedy line of being able to sometimes do full comedies, but also... The Four Seasons also was a character that felt like he was in and out of a comedy. And so that's always such a pleasure to see. And Schwartzman kind of being the one that's like on the outskirts, the one that's kind of you almost think he's the one that might be out. He's the one with like the lowest level of wealth. So he's like really showing off the house in like these really pathetic ways. These ways that only Jason Schwartzman's capable of making such a pathetic character so watchable. And then and Rami Youssef kind of being like the closest thing to a voice of reason. And just sort of watching this, do you even call it a friendship? And you ask yourself that question as it goes on throughout it. Is, like, are these people friends, or what are they exactly to each other? And kind of seeing that spiral in different directions. And seeing these sort of different aspects to them, like, as far as how they react to things. Like, there's moments where Carell will just snap and start yelling, but they're very brief, and then he'll like smile or laugh or something. And there are moments where it's like it's hard to tell if he really was kidding or not, and it's not always confirmed. All that's really confirmed is that there is an unhinged quality to him, which makes either one likely. So, and you get the Corey Michael Smith character where he's like the only real look we get on the outside world are on their screens watching the news as things are going completely to shit. Like there's, explosions going off and attacks going on and wars going on. And they're just kind of... And it's like their technology is right in the middle of all this. And there's the point in time where they're watching like bodies burn and people screaming. And Corey Michael Smith's character is basically coping by trying to convince himself it's AI. Like, the images they're watching aren't real. And you can see the coping can only do so much as it goes. And you see these other sides, but, like, at the end of the day, they are still, like, the sort of... Like, if you want to... Like, if one of your concerns going into it is that it, like, sort of maybe glorifies the lifestyle of people like this... It's like, just immediately, when we meet one of the characters at the beginning, I think Corey Michael Smith, when it's like, oh, is this going to seem like a really desirable lifestyle? It's like, do we want to be this guy that has so much power he doesn't really give a shit what the outcome is and what the consequences of it are? And his interaction with this yes man sitting behind him immediately sets up how we're probably intended to feel about them. And then right there it was like, okay, I get where we are and what we're doing, and that's the outlook I'm going to have as we go through this movie. That's the intention. And like I said, exasperated as the laughs might be, they do come through if you see it through that satirical mindset. So, like I was saying, the last third of it does go in a pretty insane direction that I was not expecting. So, and I don't really want to say what that is, but that's when it like kind of kicks off in this direction of where the hell is this going to go and how is it going to end? Which might be something that you're asking throughout the movie, but especially when we get to the third act, it's like, good, how insane is this going to get exactly? And I like the fact that it doesn't go as over the top as it could have. Part of me also kind of wants to know what it would have been if it did decide to go completely over the top for the last third in the direction that it's going. But as is, I do like pretty much where we end up and where we land with the characters. And it leaves us in this sort of effective place as far as we're not going to be particularly satisfied, we're not going to be particularly happy, but given the characters and the setup and the way we view them, and, everything else, that it seems about right. Like, when it ends, it's like, I don't feel satisfied or happy, but it feels right. That's about the right place that this would end. So, yeah. So those are kind of complicated feelings, but I do like this quite a bit. And yeah, I can get if people, once again, did not get what they thought they were getting when they went into it, and that's why you might hear a lot of people say that they think this is shit. I can get it, I suppose, but I was into it. So that's how I feel about those. 4 movies that I really like, one in particular that I really love. So we'll see what else. Hearing all the great word about F1, which I'm seeing next week and I'm very excited about. Megan, I guess, we'll see how that turns out. I mentioned Echo Valley. And there's other things going on, so we'll get to all of that and see what happens. So until the next thing, I think that's it.